Welcome to the Recess Life Podcast. This is the place where we explore play and what it means to get back to your inner child. I'm Louise, your host. Join me as I chat with teachers, entrepreneurs, artists, and thought leaders about how we can live a life of more play and impact. Let's get it started. Hello, everyone. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about it. I did something a little bit different. If you're watching this on video, you'll see that I did the interview in person. So the person and I, her name is Jenny Feinberg, we sat together at her art studio to talk a little bit about her path from working in politics to opening up a co-working community to now working as a full-time artist. And I thought it would be really fun to go and sit in her element and chat with her while she was actually painting. And it was such a cool experience to be able to do that with her, to see her in her own creative element and to actually be having a conversation while she was simultaneously creating. And it was really fun for me to do that. And a couple things about that, though, you'll notice if you're watching this on video, and you'll hear it if you're just listening it on audio, is that at one point I was trying to adjust the camera and the microphone so that it was a little bit closer to us. So you'll hear sort of a scratching sound on the concrete while I was moving the chair close to me. So you'll hear a little bit of that in the background, and I apologize for that. I'm still new to this, learning how to create content, record videos, record audio, all that stuff. So thank you for bearing with me on this journey. This is definitely a messy creative process that I am learning a lot about. So with that said, I hope that you enjoy the interview and that you take in Jenny's wisdom and that you'll learn something from her journey about working from politics to now working as an artist and what we can learn from her. So enjoy, and I'll catch you at the end of the episode to talk a little bit about some takeaways from the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Recess Life Podcast. If you are watching this on video, you will notice there's a little bit of a different setup than you have typically seen. I am here in this crazy, gorgeous open loft that has been turned into an art studio. And today we have my darling friend, Jenny Feinberg, who is painting for her next show. So we're going to definitely dig in and talk about how she has gotten here and what she is up to in this world. But before we get started, hello, Jenny. How are you?
Thanks for coming to visit me in my studio.
Absolutely.
So happy to have you.
This is such a treat, and to see you in your element is amazing. I feel like I've just walked into this magical wonderland, and this is a far cry from the life you lived prior to moving to San Francisco. So you lived in San Francisco you technically moved out, but you technically are here right now. But you lived in San Francisco for how long before you moved out last year?
I lived in the Bay for 8 years. I moved here in 2009.
Yeah.
And then moved to Los Angeles in 2017.
2017. Yep. So just barely left San Francisco. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, you lived in the East. You lived on the East Coast.
Yeah. In
DC. And what were you doing there at the time?
So I actually lived in all the East Coast cities very briefly for like political internships in college. I grew up outside Philly. I went to college outside Boston. I'd done internships in New York and DC, but I wasn't really in any of those cities for that long. But yeah. I did live in Philly for a couple years after college.
Okay. And Philly after college. And then where were you, how long were you in, where were you doing politics?
I worked in Biden's Senate office in D.C. on Capitol Hill.
Wow.
And then I worked in Hillary's Senate office in New York City.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quite the different world from where you are now.
Indeed.
Yeah. And what about politics really drew you to it at first?
I love the concept of service, and I always have the idea that, if you're born with any sort of privilege, it's your responsibility to leverage that privilege to be of service to other people. So, whether it's white privilege, economic privilege, education privilege, supportive family, there's a lot of different privileges one could have, and I have many of them. So I said, well, I'm healthy and I have support for higher education. I should be a public servant, and that kind of is how I got to that place.
Yeah, so it was coming from a place of wanting to serve.
It felt like a responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the end, is there a reason in particular why it didn't feel right?
I worked in politics for 10 years. I worked on a lot of campaigns. I support a lot of women running for office. But ultimately, what I discovered in campaign politics and in elected offices, there's so much politicking that has to happen before the actual service can be done, or in order for the service to be done, that it actually felt extraordinarily inefficient and inauthentic. And I felt like politics was turning me into this kind of vapid version of who I really was. I had to consistently repeat myself and use the same talking points and have a certain way that I looked and sounded and presented myself so that I would, I ultimately could be electable if I was going to run for office myself.
Yeah.
So it just felt like the political system as a whole, while positioned to help people serve others, there's so many other ways to do that too, and maybe that actually isn't the most efficient way. So I started really questioning it after I'd been in there for 8, 9, 10 years. Wow. By the way, I'm going to be painting while we talk.
Yes, please do. And I have to wonder how many people can relate to that story of, wanting to go into a career with, the best of intentions and coming from the best place, but then they realize that they have to sort of fit into this world that maybe is not true to who they actually are. And they try to mold themselves to fit into this box. And, some hopefully, if they're successful, are doing it because it's true to who they are. But yeah, you have to wonder how many of us are doing that.
I think it's hard when when you're learning about these jobs conceptually from an ivory tower that is college. Everything sounds interesting and sexy, and I love U.S. history, and I love the idea of presidential politics and some of the essential celebrities that have governed, but it's a very different moment now, and because of social media and because of the way we're all able to connect and communicate so quickly, I think that politics is also changing, and we don't know how quite yet to keep up with that and how to adapt. And so we're seeing a lot of celebrity-like folks getting elected to office, which isn't a bad thing per se, but it is an interesting reflection of what our needs are and what we're attuned to versus what was conceived as presidential or perceived as presidential, 10, 20, 30 years ago. So so we don't need to make this a whole political discussion, but I do think that it was perhaps naive of me to think that that was the most effective way to serve, but it's definitely the most obvious. If you wanted to somehow serve others, politics seems like the way to go, but
right,
you
didn't know any different, right? You didn't know anything beyond what you were told and what you were given as options
and
growing up.
Definitely helped me in my public speaking and knowing what I stand for and knowing how to interact with a huge array of people. I love working on campaigns. I love getting to know folks. I just ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not that extroverted. So being out and about and being on a campaign trail and needing to appease hundreds of people every day is really exhausting and challenging for me. So I actually wasn't even certain I would be the most effective either in a role like that if I did, ultimately run for office. So.
Was there a moment when you decided or knew that you needed to take a different path from politics, or was there sort of a gradual shift?
So pretty much all of the major choices that have happened in my life happened to me. It wasn't so much like a brave or bold choice. My last job in politics was working for a company called democracy.com, and we had built a tool that was kind of like Facebook. It was plug and play. It would help local candidates build a campaign website to run for office. So I was kind of traveling the country representing them, trying to help candidates all over the country to run and be able to raise money online. And they ran out of funding. So we kind of like abruptly shut down.
Right, so the choice was made for you.
Exactly, and so it was the first time I ever had an abrupt pause in my career. I usually always kind of knew what was lined up next. Mm-hmm. And so it was the first time I thought I was allowed to consider anything else, or I was allowed to wonder. And at that point, it was 2013, 2014-ish, so it was about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Love that book. Everyone should read that if you haven't.
Yeah, it's a book about healing. It's a book about kind of remembering your inner child and asking her like what she wanted and what brought her joy in a way that ultimately also can serve others, you know, to the extent that you feel healed and whole and present. Yeah. So that you can kind of support other people. Mm-hmm.
How did you find The Artist's Way? How did it come into your path?
I think it was one of those books you buy and then, you know, when the right time to read it occurs, it's the right time. So I think it was one of those things that I just kind of always knew when I had a decent amount of time. It's almost like therapy. It's really, it's a real deep dive. It's a 12-week program that's based on AA, so it has a lot of the same tenets as a recovery program would have, because it's basically giving you an opportunity, an invitation to recover creatively and address and consider wounds around why you didn't pursue things that once brought you joy and how you might be able to do it later without some sense of loss or, you know, an okayness with being a beginner. So it was really beautiful, and it really kind of opened my eyes up to how self-expression can be such a service.
Because at that point, did you feel like there was, I'm sure just over the 8 years that you were doing politics, that there was something that was just not right, and there was something that needed to be healed?
Well, I guess the question was, like, how do I take all the skills I learned as a political strategist, you know, supporting candidates, et cetera, and apply it to something else? Like, community organizing is an unbelievable skill that you don't need just a campaign to use. So, you know, basically what I ended up doing was building a community. I was like, who else is kind of lusting after that inner child, like desiring some sense of play and satisfaction in their life that is either separate from work or part of their work, or, you know, it doesn't matter how you weave play and delight into your day, but the question is, once you're in your late 20s, early 30s, is it still a priority? Can you still do it with, you know, health concerns, financial worries, you know,
obligations,
kids? Yeah, and you know, and what would it mean to have a community of people who supported each other in kind of going after that sense of joy?
Yeah. And so you decided that you were going to seek out those other people and to see if others felt that same way you did.
And I called it coworking because if you want to get adults to show up for something, you have to make it around work. But once folks like participated and returned and were part of the community, people knew that I cared very little about the co-working part. It was more about having connection in doing something, whatever you were doing. And
and tell us, when you say co-working, what was the community that you created out of co-working? Because that's how you and I met.
Exactly. So it was 5 years ago. So it was before the co-working movement had really blown up in major cities. So there weren't like tons and tons of spaces and places to go. So there was this kind of prevailing sense of loneliness for anyone who didn't have an office to go to during the day. So I created a concept called Make Space, and the idea was we would make space in underutilized places all throughout the city. And I kind of just started asking folks to connect me with other folks, to connect me with people who they knew were otherwise sitting in coffee shops, and that would love to have community during the day. And you were a super active member. It was really fun.
Yep. Yeah. So I was browsing on Facebook one day, and our mutual friend Smiley, hey Smiley, he had posted on his Facebook profile that you were doing a crowdfunding campaign to launch Make Space, and I think I only read maybe the first couple paragraphs of the page, and I was like, okay, I'm in. because
awesome.
I work nomadically and work remotely, and yeah, I definitely feel that craving to be around other creative people and to have a sense of community. So I signed up and became a member and started coming to the co-working sessions and met you and so many amazing creative people. It was everyone from artists to clothing entrepreneurs to developers, designers, just really incredible people. And it was definitely a big part of my life, I think, the whole time while you were doing it, pretty much.
Yeah.
And during that time, what did you discover for yourself? Because you were definitely creating this for other people, but what did it shift within you by creating this creative community?
That's a good question. They say we teach what we need to learn, so it's definitely hard to be a manager or to be a leader of something when it's something that you also crave and desire. So I did feel like it was challenging, if not impossible, for me to actually participate in Makespace and get to enjoy it myself. So it was lovely that so many people were getting so much out of it, but I never really got to do my project or do my work. It was more about where my project was the project, was holding the space for people. So it was extremely satisfying. I met some of the most amazing people in my whole life, and people that will be lifelong friends. But I think from a long-term perspective, I'm not sure how sustainable it would be, because I basically took the only professional training I had, which was 10 years in politics, and then recreated it into a company. So for all intents and purposes, it was like I was running a campaign. I was pulling together the people that would be interested and invested and excited in the thing I was doing, and rallying, around a concept and a theory. And it was beautiful, but it was also more of an extroverted task. I think it lasted for the exact time it should have, and it was meant to. I think it was beautiful for what it was and when it was, but I'm not sure I would have been able to keep going for another year. I probably would have burnt out. So interesting to see the parallels in what you did in politics to creating a creative co-working community. Really, you were running a campaign. Never saw it that way, but I think that's so cool to note too, because what we do in our life will inform the next step, and we take what we learn from our previous experiences and we apply it, and then we hopefully get a little bit closer each time to our true selves. And I think you have to adopt a mindset of openness and play in order to really do that, and not to muscle yourself into a box that isn't right for you. And at the end of the day, we are who we are. So it's also funny to think that when we try to change or when we evolve, at the end of the day, at a core level, we are ourselves. We need to accept ourselves and love ourselves and understand why at different stages of our lives we're drawn to different things and whatnot. So it's not surprising that I recreated what I knew in politics into more of a community situation. But at the end of the day, it was still not enough. It was still not enough of an outlet. And I didn't know at the time. I have a theory about creative expression, that there are things we repress that we're actively aware exist, and we try to hush them and shush them, and there's things that are suppressed, which is what art really was for me for a long time. That I always loved making art. It was a hobby that I really enjoyed and was good at when I was younger, but it wasn't something I felt a sadness around not pursuing more aggressively as an adult. So the fact that I'm now here 5 years later painting professionally kind of was not the plan.
No, it was not.
But here we are.
Yeah. So you started painting again while you were running Makespace, correct?
Towards the end.
The end of it.
We had this kind of amazing space that we worked out of for a year, and when we were starting to lose it due to circumstances changing, kind of the way I grappled with the transition was to just take out a bunch of paints and paint all the time. To cope with the loss. And it was I think when you're the leader of a group of people all day, you talk a lot, and I think my brain was just really tired.
Yeah.
And so to find a way to express myself and to reflect that wasn't so based on word, I think was really, really vital for me. And
or to have to do it out loud.
Yeah, or even the way we're doing now, if there's some sort of if I'm, within conversation, if there's some sort of other outlet, I've learned that that's really good for me. I have pretty severe ADHD, so having multiple stimulation, at the same time, actually allows me to focus more easily on both things happening.
I hear that as well.
As opposed to it being draining. So,
yep.
So I just kind of started painting in the remaining weeks that we had in the space.
And what specific, did you have any specific epiphanies while you were starting to paint again, such as, anything that it tapped into that you hadn't experienced before?
Well, it definitely felt amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I started with watercolor, which I'm still primarily using. That felt like especially potent because professional watercolors are kind of like a misunderstood field and brand, and like it's really hard but really rewarding to learn how to use watercolors properly. But I think the biggest thing that was, again, out of my control was the fact that people started asking me about commissions and sales based on what I was sharing on Facebook. So, like, because this wasn't the plan or the goal, it kind of was this, like, pleasant surprise and evolution for people to want to invest in the art I was making and the work I was making. So it kind of encouraged me to keep going.
Right. So, yeah, there wasn't the plan to necessarily make money off your art. Not right away, at least.
I don't think I ever thought I could. I still don't know if I can.
But you just started getting DMs on Instagram from people asking about your art.
It was mostly people that I knew at first through Facebook, but then eventually kind of, I'm not sure exactly how the algorithm works on Instagram, but I'm pretty sure when you post things that are really bright and really like zoomed in, they're more likely to be on the discovery feed, so people will see them. So I started getting messages from strangers too, which was really cool.
Wow. And so that it gave you the extra push to keep going.
Yeah, and if you're making money, you might as well keep doing it.
Right, if something's working there.
Even if it seems too good to be true, it's a little scary.
Right. Because you decided shortly after MakeSpace closed, shortly after you decided to move. Or was there time in between that before you decided to move out of San Francisco?
I did some travel where I was creating more art. But I guess, a job opportunity came up in Los Angeles that would have been kind of similar to MakeSpace in that I would be managing a community space. And what felt really nice about that is it was super part-time, so I realized if I was going to try to pursue this art thing, I definitely needed to have a base income so that, if things didn't work out any given month, I could support myself. So that was kind of the ideal arrangement that, through a series of connections through MakeSpace kind of showed up. So it seemed like the right, and I didn't have anything else going on in San Francisco, so it seemed like the right time and opportunity to take up and to see what LA had in store for me.
Yeah, you were just open to the process of what was going to happen, and this opportunity came about, so why not go and explore it?
I also just couldn't really afford to live in San Francisco. The rents had gotten so insane, and they continue to, and even in my rent-controlled apartment, there was no space to make art. I would take over the living room, which wasn't fair to my roommates. So it's a pretty painful, transition topic around what does it mean to be an artist in the Bay Area? How can you afford space?
Yep.
So I kind of, in some ways, as sad as it was to leave the people I love, because I think the community here is incredible, it was the right thing for me to be able to move to a place that had more space at a more affordable rate. And people don't really consider LA that cheap by any means, but it's cheaper than the Bay. Yeah. Because it's bigger.
That's when you know how expensive San Francisco is if LA feels affordable.
Exactly.
So was there ever thought of getting off this path of quote unquote uncertainty with art and deciding to do something more stable, quote unquote, and go back to that? Was that ever a consideration for you?
I think it's hard because once you are in a place of open discovery and you keep learning new levels and kind of inquiring about who you are and what you are, it's hard to look back. So even when things get really scary or money gets really unknown, it's hard to think about the life you had before and try to recreate it. So I think it's a yes and. I think from a practical standpoint, absolutely. But I think my highs and my lows, like as far as milestones are concerned, were pretty dramatic enough, but well paced enough that I was able to somehow kind of like,
right.
But it's still an everyday like open question and struggle. I don't think at any point as an artist you really like make it, because there's always kind of new internal challenges that come up, or questions around seasons when people tend to buy more, or what people think your art is worth, and there's just it's very 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 ambiguous, and no one's artist's path is similar to another's.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for people to give advice.
Yeah.
But no, I can't say I did work in coworking for a couple years in LA before I was just doing art. So in some ways I did kind of still relive the life I knew before. But at a certain point I just wasn't really enjoying running coworking spaces.
Yep.
Because it was never about coworking for me. It was building communities.
Community. So much goodness in everything you just said there, because I think it is scary to go down that path of reflection and inquiry into your truer self.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you said about hard to go back once you start that path.
Yeah, it's actually harder to not inquire, because then that's the suppression versus the repression again. Like if you have pending questions and curiosities, that's repressed to not address them, to not let them. So you don't need to deal with them all at once. You don't need to even go super deep, but at least knowing what the questions are, so that they at least exist somewhere outside your psyche and your head, I think gives you a lot of breathing room and freedom and patience to take your time with them. And maybe that's when you go get a therapist, or you open up to a friend. There's infinite numbers of ways we can discover and rediscover ourselves, so I don't think you're ever done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you don't let yourself start, then it leads to a lot of resentment and jealousies, and you can be easily triggered and affected by other people pursuing things that maybe you wish you could have. So it's really the most effective way to heal, I think, is to know what your questions are, and to understand that inquiry and ambiguity is the work of a lifetime. So, the sooner the better to get started on that.
Right? Yeah, you might as well face it head on now,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to pop up sooner or later, or you're just going to live with it for the rest of your life, or you're going to live with questions for the rest of your life.
Because you also have suppressed things. You also have things that you're not actively silencing that will eventually surface too. So you have to almost make space for the questions you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
so that at least the questions that you can somehow tackle or acknowledge they exist. It's never healthy by any means to deny something you feel, or to ignore something that is consistently coming up for you, or so. And sometimes we don't even realize it is until we realize it. So it also sometimes just takes time.
Yep, absolutely. It's the work of a lifetime. And I think the way you handled some of the uncertainty, which I really love, is that you did have other jobs and other gigs that gave you that base. You worked in coworking, you taught art, you took care of kids, and some prominent ones in Hollywood that we won't mention the name of the parents, but you did that so that you could continue to work on your craft and continue to build what you're doing right now with art.
Yeah, I don't think pursuing a passion or a love ever needs to be exclusively your full-time job. I think the most important thing is having some integration of it in some meaningful way, whether it's 1 hour a month, 1 hour a week, whatever it looks like. You want the conversation with yourself about the thing you want to do to be healthy and supportive.
And it might not be healthy if you're letting yourself be a quote-unquote starving artist and not take care of yourself.
But on the other hand, if you're not pursuing the thing that you want to do or that you think you might love doing, that's okay too. Having kind of forgiveness around that, and telling yourself, well, right now is a time when I'm doing X, or I'm taking care of my family, or I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what it means to pursue something that you think you must do. Sometimes the timing isn't right, and sometimes it's okay. In the same way of eliciting those questions you have about yourself. Once you know what the things are, it's so much easier to then pace and address and get to them when you get to them. It's a question of just not denying it.
Not denying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and getting rid of the shoulds around it in general.
Yeah, and again, I do think it really comes down to forgiveness. But yeah, I never actually chose to become a full-time artist. I did always have other part-time jobs to like stay afloat, but circumstances once again led to a place where about I don't know, like 4 or 5 months ago, I kind of been primarily exhibiting and selling my work. So that's been a whole other challenge, and yeah, it's been scary and fun. Yeah.
Yes, so we're seeing you at as you're cresting, as you're moving towards that pivotal point. It's so exciting.
It's fun. It's scary. It's really scary every day.
Bet. Oh my gosh, I bet it's I can only imagine what it must feel like. But you get to feel the full range of emotions, and
every day.
How beautiful is that? Yeah,
sometimes
it doesn't stop. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're up to now with your art. What does it look like on a day-to-day, and then some of the bigger projects that you're working on?
So I have a few exhibits coming up. So that's the main thing I'm preparing for. The thing with exhibits is you have to prepare a huge body of work, and you don't get paid for any of it until they sells. So it's a little bit disconcerting to do a tremendous amount of work for free, and then kind of keep your fingers crossed and hope that people want to invest in the work you did once it's done. So yeah, I'm having a show in San Francisco the beginning of March, and then I think I probably just finalized a show in Los Angeles in May. Waiting to hear back. That's many pieces, so that's going to be a little bit of a daunting preparation task.
Man.
And there might be a hotel I'm in conversations with, but I won't say where or what that is yet, because that's very new, but I'm really excited about that one.
Yes.
So.
Aren't you doing something on the East Coast also? I thought I read something.
No, I was recently home, so I painted a bunch on the East Coast. Oh, okay. That's true. I have a residency set up.
Yes.
With a co-working space called Indie Hall.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out how to do more things like this, how to have my art practice moving along, but also like being able to connect with people and, have a day and have relationships and that kind of thing. So it's hard because I just have to kind of work all the time now.
Yeah.
But, to the degree that I'm near friends and that there's things are going on with me and near me, then it's like kind of a win-win situation.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, for sure. Do you have any personal practices around dealing with those highs and lows and those scary emotions that you have to face every day?
What a loaded question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like to I think of the lowest low and the highest high on like a 1 to 10 scale. So I always kind of try to contextualize how I'm feeling. Like if I feel crappy or feel great, like is it a 3 or is it a 7? Is it a 9? Because that kind of helps me think through. Another video just dulled. I don't know if that matters. It helps me think through how much better, how much worse it could be, and try to like zoom out for a minute and like think about how I felt before in different times in the artist path, if you will. So that's like the most general way to describe it. But I think, generally when I feel a snag, when I feel some resistance in the creative process, it usually definitively means keep going or walk away. And there's no gray area. So, a lot of literature says keep going, and a lot of literature says take care of yourself. Step away. And I found that one can be workaholism and one can be indulgence. So to really honor the fact that it's probably 50-50. And sometimes whatever instinct I have about, like, if I really want to walk away or I really want to keep going, I think through what it would be like to do the opposite and see how I kind of intuitively relate to that. And then I make my decision. Because, it's hard. This is a very, like, feeling-based practice. And I paint abstract, so there's kind of that kind of unspoken element to like expressing your feelings. So it's definitely a work in progress. I don't have great words to describe it yet, which I guess is kind of the point.
Right.
But
it's a process.
Yeah.
Right. You've mentioned before the idea of painting for play, and then versus to produce. And how do you decide which one is the right time to do which?
Good question. So basically, the most important thing as a fine artist, I believe, is to be constantly learning. Like every single day, you have to be a slightly better artist than you were yesterday. So what that requires is creating a ton of bad art, doing a lot of studies, just being really, really intimately in touch with how much there is to grow and go. And so it's like being an artist isn't really about like being proud of what you painted yesterday. It's about being excited about what you're going to paint in a week from now. So a lot of times when I'm in like deep study mode, like student mode, I'm not producing a lot. I don't have a lot of posts that I can like put on Instagram or things I can sell. So I consider that more of like play, exploration, like growth, like a career growth. But then when I have exhibits, I need to kind of buckle down. It's less about like problem solving and guessing and guess gaming. And like each canvas still teaches me something, but I'm only now seeing that like I have to have a little bit more of a plan when I am like going to exhibit mode, or I need to, you know, in some ways a lot of the paintings, if I look back on my exhibits from the past year, like they're less risky because they have to resolve. Like they have to somewhat be within the toolkit of the kind of art I know how to make. Whereas in my free time, in my playtime, in my like student time,
you're experimenting.
Yeah, I like overwork. I go crazy. I like screw up the colors. I want to see just how deep into a painting I can get. So hopefully, like have something I learn from it.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you have, in order to get to the final work, you have to go through that play period where you're experimenting and being risky and maybe creating something bad, quote unquote, right? And I think that's such an important notion to remember, that when you're being a creative person and when you're playing, you may do things that are not perfect, and that's okay because it's going to move you forward.
It's vital.
Absolutely.
Like, being an artist, again, is not about creating great art. It's about constantly questioning what you made, what you did, why you did it, and then looking at a different way of looking at it. So, I'm so new to this, so I have so much catching up to do, too. So, I've not been trained formally my whole life in art. I've been learning obsessively from textbooks and YouTube lectures. So there's just so much for me to there's so many ways in which I can grow, but more importantly, I don't want to burn out. So I do have to kind of inject this kind of fun element to it, whether it's teaching watercolor workshops or having private lessons, or just making art that is not ever going to get posted on the internet. But it is definitely what makes this career choice very hard to explain to people, because I think it's just kind of this like, oh, you just paint all day. It's like, no. And, there's a lot. But part of it is really just like, the experimenting and like the private kinds of art, and not just like the exhibits and the fun stuff.
Yeah. And it's really, I think it's really scary that I meet more people than not that are just afraid to do anything because they're afraid of not being perfect at it right away. Right? Whether it's wanting to try a new hobby or wanting to paint, who knows, right? And I have to wonder, how did we get to this place, and how did we create a society where that's so prevalent and that's more the norm?
We don't really have time for hobbies anymore. So the idea of hobbies was really like this joyful opportunity to do something regardless of the outcome and regardless of whether it was good or bad, and so I think, if we take everything very seriously and it has to be like a career kind of thing, then, there isn't a lot of opportunity to do it poorly. Right. Or to play within it. So
there's not.
Yeah, nope. I would love to see the return of hobbies.
I know. Yes. Everyone, find a hobby that you just want to try, even if you're not perfect at it. And let yourself be imperfect and let yourself mess up. And it's okay. You're not any less worthy of love. What would you call this path, or what would you call this journey, life?
I think, again, like kind of going back to where we started with public service, is that if you are born with any kind of privilege, whether it's privilege of a healthy body, the privilege to be able to move home with your family or someone, if you run into money, the privilege of white privilege, the privilege of, whatever the privilege is, education privilege, economic privilege, do what you need to do to address your wounds, because it doesn't matter how great your life is or how hard your life is. We all struggle with something. Absolutely. And but if you struggle less than others, take the resources that are out there. Find the therapist, read the books, connect with people. It's not about healing. It's about growing. It's about really investigating who you are and what you are, and knowing, again, what your triggers are. I think that it behooves any of us that have access to any resources to know ourselves a little bit better. That enables us to be of service to anyone and everyone, and really be present and really kind of be a good person. So I think in some ways painting has just brought me back to who I already was. But I think in the same regard, there's going to be so many other versions of me and so many other explorations that I don't even know yet and can't even anticipate that are still, going to kick my ass. So, it's beautiful that now I can sell art to folks that have like a really meaningful emotional connection to it. And that definitely does give me the sense of achievement that I was seeking in a political realm. But it can be individually, it can be one-on-one, it can be through commission work. So I think, I think if folks are kind of wanting to pursue something in a really serious, meaningful way, the first thing is finding out what that thing is and asking themselves. And when I read The Artist's Way 5 years ago, I made a huge list of things. Painting was one of 13 things. I thought about photography, graphic design, I thought about calligraphy. There's 1,000 different ways. Some people are more inclined toward music or dance, like yourself. But, knowing what those things are, not as responsibilities or burdens or, nothing you need to feel guilty about not doing, but at least knowing what those things are creates an opportunity to potentially sign up for a class or walk into them at the time when the time is right. So just, again, the acknowledgement. But then, create a priority, whether it's $100 budget or whether it's a class or whether it's a YouTube instructional video. Let yourself demonstrate to yourself that you are interested and willing to pursue the thing, and make it really, really small. Make it really accessible. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged lifestyle.
No.
Just starting a hobby, and a lot of people find out when they started they didn't actually like it as much as they thought they would. Yep. They had this idea of what it was.
Absolutely.
And that's, I guess how I found entrepreneurship. It was rewarding until it wasn't. It was exhausting and not exactly the perfect...
But you're still an entrepreneur, just in a very different regard.
Yeah, art is a business for sure, but to have to hold space and presence for an entire community was definitely something I was better suited for in my younger ages.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely can't imagine doing that all over again now.
No, but it led you to where you are.
For sure.
And it was the season that was right for you at the time.
Absolutely.
And it led you here.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, just taking that small step, taking a class. I am learning the ukulele, and
love that.
I'll maybe just learn 15 minutes a week. And that's okay. I have this little goal of learning a song a month, and that's totally doable, right? And I'm not going to be a ukulele star. Who knows? But that's not the plan. But it is something that I need to express and that I want to explore more.
Sure.
So why not?
Sure.
So yeah, I love that you said doing it with the purpose of, I think doing these things they do make us a better person, and it enables us to really serve. And
when we carry around wounds and burdens and sadnesses and regrets, it makes it harder to connect with other people. And so again, like, I don't think we can heal all of these things or will ever be these like yogic spiritual but to at least to know what our things are helps other people be more sensitive around us and know kind of how to interact with us and how to preface things and give us a heads up around, and it just helps you be a little bit more human.
A little more whole.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm so excited to see your art career take off even more. It's been so amazing to be a part of the journey, just the small part that I've had, and
that's super means a lot to me.
I can't wait. Your art's going to be hanging up in everyone's house in San Francisco. I have a feeling.
I would love that.
Yes, your art is in my room for sure
true.
already.
It's
so
true. You are an early collector.
I am. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so honored. It's so great to have you here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into that conversation with my dear friend, the one and only Jenny Feinberg. Every time I listen to that conversation, I am just so blown away by how far she has come. She went from working in politics to running a co-working community to now working as a full-time watercolor artist. And I know growing up, the thought of making a living as an artist was absurd. You don't hear that as being a viable career path. And who knows, it might not be something Jenny does forever, but right now it's really feeding her soul and really giving her the healing that she needs and is allowing her to serve in the world the way that feels best for her. And I really love that she's not working in a conventional way. She sells and gets the word out about her art mostly on Instagram. You should follow her at Jenny Feinberg. She has about 18,000 followers, and every time she has an exhibit, every time she has a piece for sale, or she is putting an offer out for commissions, a lot of the times she gets them through Instagram. She doesn't even have a personal website. So I think that is truly remarkable, and it's so amazing because of the world we live in these days. There's so many ways to get our work out there and to be creative and to make a living as an artist. And I'm just so proud of her. Now let's recap some of the takeaways from this conversation. Number 1, get on the path of inquiry in your life as soon as possible. So what does that mean? That is getting on a path where you are inquiring about what you need to do in your life to truly heal and to become a whole person. And I think that really looks like, what are the internal yearnings and wounds that I have that I need to address as soon as possible. And the sooner the better. Because the longer you wait, the more it's going to show up in your life later. Whether you have a midlife crisis, whether you have regrets when you get old, you just don't want that to happen. So get on that path of inquiry in your life as soon as possible and be open to where it's going to take you. And trust me, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it when you start to discover parts of yourself that you've been holding back or repressing or suppressing. So just get on that path now. Number 2, find a way to meaningfully integrate your creative passions into your life. For Jenny, it meant that she was doing other jobs like managing other co-working communities and nannying for a prominent Hollywood family while she worked on her craft. The dad is a heartthrob from my days of growing up, and I wish I could tell you his name, but I can't. She was the nanny to his kids and was also the kids' in-home art teacher. And this really allowed her to practice her craft, give her space to be able to produce art. She wasn't making it her full-time job yet because that wasn't going to be healthy for her. Find a way it can be meaningful for you so that you can have a healthy relationship with your creative passions. That might mean just doing a class a week, maybe an hour a day of practicing something. Maybe it means setting aside a $100 budget, but find what works for you so that it meaningfully integrates to make it work for your life. And eventually, Jenny was able to make a full-time job out of what she's doing with art, but that doesn't have to be your life if that doesn't work for you. So find what works for you. Number 3, make bad art. When Jenny is practicing her craft, she specifically sets aside time and space to make bad art, to practice, to scribble, to experiment, to be a little bit riskier, because in order to get to the final product, she needs it to be messy at first. In fact, she said that it's absolutely vital. So when you are starting any sort of creative practice, let it be messy and imperfect, but don't let it stop you from starting altogether. Just know that there is a process and it's going to be messy at first, but with time you will get better and you will learn what works and what doesn't. So go and make that bad art because that's the only way you'll be able to get to the good stuff. If you aren't already, make sure you subscribe to wherever you are listening to this, either iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you feel inclined, please leave a review and let me know what could make this better, what was interesting to you, what resonated with you. I would love to hear from you. And you can also follow the podcast at The Recess Life on Instagram, where I share fun tips, fun pieces of content about play and how to live a creative life. You can go to therecesslife.com for all of the show notes from today's episode. I look forward to seeing you next week for a new episode where I share another conversation with a creative and inspiring person. I look forward to seeing you then, and don't forget to go out and play today.